Log entry, day 215. I am a quantum metrologist. My entire career is built on the principle that when your data contradicts your model, you do not ignore the data. You rebuild the model, no matter how much the new model ruins your day. The swim back was 380 meters of me rebuilding the model. I moved fast, counting strokes, letting the math run in the back of my head the way it always does when I'm doing something physical and mindless. The other Elliot, the gray dry suit, the fogged visor, the slow raised hand cycled through my thoughts on a loop. Here was the problem. The Elliot I had seen in my first quantum superposition flash, the one from the invading timeline, the one I had been calling the enemy ever since, was standing in a sunlit kitchen in Montreal. Flannel shirt, wedding ring, espresso. He was not underground. He had no reason to be underground. In his timeline, the DIDP project presumably either didn't exist or had been canceled when the mine was contracted out to a company called Veritech, and he was up there being annoyingly happy, while I was down here swimming through freezing water, trying to save a universe that had sentenced me to a 1-year solo rotation. So who was in that generator room? Not Timeline B Elliot. Timeline B Elliot was in Montreal. Which meant the gray dry suit, the fogged visor, the raised hand? That was someone from a completely different timeline. A third one. One I hadn't accounted for. One where Veritech ran the mine, but an Elliot still ended up underground, alone, on some version of the same project, for reasons I could only guess at. I surfaced into the airlock at the 22-minute mark, hauled myself up the ladder, and stripped the helmet off before the outer door had finished cycling. I was already at the primary console before the dry suit hit the floor. The power was back. 3 megawatts of geothermal electricity humming through a cable I had personally dragged through a flooded tunnel. Every monitor blazed to life. The ventilation system roared. The CO2 scrubbers kicked in with a sound like a deep, satisfied exhale. I didn't celebrate. I pulled up the quantum field telemetry and started running new numbers. Here is what I had assumed from the beginning. One timeline was collapsing into mine. One wavefront, moving inward from a single direction, compressing my heavy water bubble like a slowly closing fist. Clean, manageable, terrifying, but solvable. The math was the math. Here is what the telemetry was actually showing, now that I had enough power to run the full sensor array at resolution. The fine structure constant wasn't settling to a single new value. It was oscillating, flickering rapidly between at least 3 distinct numbers. My original 1/137.035999, the surface packet's 1/137.03599998, and a third value I hadn't seen before, 1/137.036001, above my baseline, a timeline that had diverged in the opposite direction. 3 distinct values, 3 distinct timelines, all collapsing simultaneously into the same point in space, which happened to be my lab. I sat back in my chair and stared at the ceiling for a moment. There is an episode of Stargate SG-1, Season 3, the one with the quantum mirror, where Daniel Jackson accidentally makes contact with an alternate reality and discovers that every time you look through the mirror, you're seeing a different universe. Carter explains that there are infinite parallel realities, all slightly different, all equally real. Jackson's response is to touch the mirror immediately and nearly get everyone killed, because Daniel Jackson has the self-preservation instincts of a golden retriever near a busy road. This made me laugh. I had always thought the most unrealistic part of that episode was that nobody immediately started asking which reality had the best outcome for them personally. Turns out, the most unrealistic part is that they only ever had to deal with one alternate timeline at a time. I wrote a new equation across my whiteboard. If n timelines are collapsing simultaneously into a single point, The total decoherence pressure on the shielded bubble isn't additive, it's multiplicative. Each wavefront reinforces the others. The math looked like this. P total equals the sum from I equals 1 to n of P sub I times the product from j not equal to I of 1 plus delta alpha sub j over alpha sub 0, where each P sub I is the individual pressure from timeline I, and the product term represents the interference amplification between wavefronts. With 2 timelines, my original calculation gave me 94 hours before the bubble collapsed. With 3 timelines, the interference amplification term blew up the math completely. I ran it 3 times because I didn't want it to be right. It was right every time. I did not have 80 remaining hours. I did not have 60. I did not have 40. The number was 23, Khalees. I had 23 hours and change before the combined wavefront pressure of 3 collapsing timelines crushed my heavy water bubble like an empty paper cup. I put the whiteboard marker down very carefully on the desk. I picked up my mug of instant coffee, realized it was empty, and put it back down. Okay, I said to the empty lab. Okay. This was the moment in Scrubs where JD would have a long, quiet fantasy sequence to process his feelings. Maybe a musical number. Maybe a slow-motion montage of meaningful glances. I did not have time for a musical number. I had 23 hours to build a machine capable of simultaneously pushing back 3 distinct quantum wavefronts, each operating at a different fine structure frequency, using equipment designed to detect proton decay and a Lego collection that was currently 4,000 pieces short of a Millennium Falcon. The decoherence array I had been planning was designed for 1 wavefront. To handle 3, I needed to broadcast 3 distinct quantum frequencies simultaneously, a harmonic triad, each one tuned to repel a specific timeline. Think of it like noise-canceling headphones, except instead of canceling ambient coffee shop noise, I was canceling the fundamental electromagnetic constant of 3 competing universes. I started sketching the modified array design. The photomultiplier tubes would need to be split into 3 independent banks, each pulsed at a different frequency. The power draw would be enormous, probably everything the geothermal generator could give me, with nothing left over for non-essential systems. Heat, ventilation, lighting, all of it would have to run on bare minimum. I had a plan. It was a bad plan in the way that all my plans were bad, meaning it was held together by physics, stubbornness, and the deeply Canadian refusal to admit defeat in adverse weather conditions. I pulled up the engineering schematic and started typing. That was when my communications terminal chimed. Of course I had customized the chime to sound like a Star Trek communicator. What did you expect? Not the surface channel. The surface channel was dead. Overwritten, gone. This was a different protocol entirely. A local band emergency signal, the kind used for mind-to-mind communication within the same shaft network. The source identifier read, Veritech Subsurface Systems, Sublevel 6, Emergency Terminal. The other Elliot had found the other end of my fiber optic tether, and he was calling me.